next concept, that is the aircraft characteristics. What are the desired characteristics that we have to look in an aircraft? And first one, the aircraft capacity. The capacity of aircraft will determine the number of passengers, baggages, cargo, and fuel that can be accommodated in an aircraft. The terminal facilities are planned to receive the aircraft of the highest capacity likely to land. This is the first point, that is aircraft capacity. The aircraft speed. The aircraft speed is referred in many ways, but the difference between the following two terms is worth noting. The first one, the airspeed, ground speed. The term airspeed is used to mean the speed of the aircraft relative to the medium in which it is traveling. The ground speed, which is sometimes also referred to as the cruising speed, is the speed of the aircraft relative to the ground. Suppose an aircraft is flying at a ground speed of about 500 km per hour in air, having the wind velocity of 50 kmph in the opposite direction. Then 500 minus 50 is equal to 450 kmph will be the airspeed. So next we will move on to our next point, that is the aircraft weight and the wheel arrangement. It is necessary to understand the components of an aircraft which make up its weight during takeoff and landing, because weight is one of the major factors which will govern the length and thickness of the runway. The wheel arrangements or configurations also plays a similar role, and the aircraft wheel arrangements have already been explained in previous explanations. So I don't want to drag these concepts too largely, so we will move on to our next characteristics, that is the fuel spillage. The fuel spillage of the spillage of fuel and the lubricants in lubricants is usually found in the landing aprons and the hangars. It is difficult to avoid the spillage completely, but the efforts are made to bring it within the minimum limit. The pavement of the bituminous material is seriously affected by the fuel spillage, and hence the area of bituminous pavement below the fueling inlet, the engines and the main landing gears are kept under the constant watch by the airport authorities. So you might have observed this in not in airport. You can observe this, the fuel spillage, in case of our bus stands. Mysore bus stand, you might have observed this, the spillage of fuels in earlier days. At present, they have transformed each and every roads into a concrete pavement. It's a different matter, but even now you can observe the fuel spillage at the different stops or bus stations. Jet blast. The turbojet and the turboprop aircraft eject hot exhaust gases at relatively high velocities. The velocity of jet blast may be as high as 300 kmph, and it may even cause inconvenience to the passengers boarding the aircraft. For this purpose, several types of blast fences are available to serve as an effective measure for diverting the smoke ejected by the engine. So next, minimum circling radius. A certain minimum radius in space is required for the aircraft to take smooth turn. It is known as the minimum circling radius, and it depends upon the type of aircraft, air traffic volume, and weather conditions. Next, the knowledge of minimum circling radius helps in separating two nearby airports by an adequate distance, so that the aircraft landing simultaneously on them do not interfere with each other. If it is not possible to provide such distances, the timings of the landing and takeoff of the aircraft in each airport will have to be suitably adjusted. This aspect will reduce the capacity of each airport. Minimum turning radius. It is necessary to know the minimum turning radius in an aircraft to decide the radius of the taxiway and to ascertain its position in the landing aprons and hangars. So not only the aircraft, while purchasing a car, you might have observed there is a column in a specification, the turning radius of the front wheel. It is important to determine the different aspects in the design of an airport. Moving on, the noise. The eighth characteristics is noise. The most serious problem facing aviation is the noise, and efforts are made to bring it to the minimum possible level. The major source of noise in an engine are machinery noise and the primary jet. During the takeoff, the dominant source of noise is the primary jet, and during approach or landing, the dominant source is the machinery noise. The disturbance caused during the takeoff is more severe than the caused during landing. This is some of the characteristic related to noise. Next, range. The distance, our 9th point is range. The distance that an aircraft can fly without refueling is known as the range. There are a number of factors which influence the range of an aircraft, the most important one being the payload. Usually, as the range is decreased, the payload is increased, and vice versa. The relationship between the payload and range is also affected by the factors such as the meteorological conditions during the flight, speed, fuel, wind, flight altitude, and amount of the reserve fuel. These are some of the considerations between or relationship between the payload and the range. Next, our 10th point is size of the aircraft. The size of the aircraft is plays a very important role in characteristics of a aircraft. So these are next, takeoff and landing distances. The takeoff and landing distances for an aircraft will help in determining the minimum runway length required for a particular type of aircraft. These distances depends upon the following factors: the altitude of the airport, gradient of the runway. Gradient we have already discussed in several times while studying the railways. Intensity and direction of the wind, manner of landing and takeoff, temperature, weight of the aircraft at the time of landing and takeoff. These are some of the factors which are influencing the takeoff and landing distances. Type of propulsion. Our 12th characteristics, type of propulsion. The type of engine used in the aircraft have already been discussed earlier. The method of propulsion adopted for a particular aircraft will decide the size, speed, weight carrying capacity, noise nuisance, circling radius, etc. Next, our 13th point is, our 13th characteristics is the tire pressure and the contact area. The tire pressure and the wheel load will give an indication of the width, type and strength of the pavement required for the different types of aircraft. These are some of the characteristics that are governing aircraft. Moving on to our next aspect in studying the introduction to airport engineering, we have to determine the characteristics, or we have to study about the characteristics or classification of airport. So classification of airport. The airports are classified by various agencies, the most popular one being the ICAO classification. The airport classification aims to achieving the uniformity in the design standards. The classification by ICAO is based on the following two types. That is, the first one is the code letter A to E are used as shown in the table below to indicate the basic runway length. This I will show you in the the table I will show you in the notes I am going to give you with this classification. Indicate the basic runway length, width of runway, pavement and maximum longitudinal grade. The second one is the number 1 to 7 are mentioned as shown in the table to indicate the single isolated wheel load and tire pressures. So coming to our first type of classification, the code letters from A to E. The airports, the classification of airports. The airports are classified as the from the code letters A to E. A. What will be the characteristics of the characterization A? Classification A. The basic runway length in meters. The maximum runway length provided for the A type is 2100 and minimum is over 2100 and the minimum is 2100. The width of runway pavement is 45 meters and the maximum longitudinal grade is 1.5%. The second classification, that is B, and what will be the maximum runway length? The maximum runway length provided for B type of classification is 2099 and the minimum provided is 1500 and the width of the runway pavement is 45 meters for this also for B type classification, and the maximum longitudinal grade provided is 1.5%. And C, for a C type classification, the maximum runway length provided is 1499 and the minimum runway length provided is 900 meters. The width of runway pavement is in 30 meters and maximum gradient longitudinal grade is 1.5. And for a D type classification, the maximum runway length provided is 899 and the minimum provided is 750 meters and the width of runway pavement is 22.5 and the maximum longitudinal grade is 2. And for a E type classification, the basic runway length provided is 749 and the minimum runway length provided is 600. The width of runway pavement is 18 meters and the maximum longitudinal grade is 2%. For next type of classification, that is ICAO airport classification, code number 1 to 7, single isolated wheel load and tire pressure. First one 45,000 kg, second classification 34,000, third classification 27,000, fourth classification 20,000 and fifth classification is 13,000. Sixth type is 7,000 and seventh type is 2,000. The tire pressure allowed for the course respectively from 1 to 7 is 8.5 kg per centimeter square, 7 and 6 5 2.5 kg per centimeter square respectively. This is about the classification of the airports. This is an important question that might be asked for about 10 marks.